At 11:52 p.m., my phone rang. When I saw who was calling, I knew something was terribly wrong. Mrs. Evelyn Hart never called me after 8 at night. She was 79, lived 3 houses away, and believed bedtime was a sacred appointment with God himself. So when her name appeared on my screen that late, I answered immediately. "Evelyn?" Her voice came through in a whisper. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to call." I sat upright in my recliner. "What happened?" There was a long breath on the other end. "It's your granddaughter, Sophie." My heart stopped for half a second. "What about Sophie?" "I've been hearing her crying through the wall for 2 nights. Everything inside me went cold. Evelyn told me she had knocked on my son's door earlier that afternoon. Sophie had opened it herself. She was 8 years old. She was still wearing pajamas. There was a bowl of plain cereal sitting on the couch, and the television was playing to an empty room. "Where are your parents?" Evelyn had asked her. Sophie told her that her mother and father had gone away on a trip. They had left Sunday morning, 2 days earlier. "Did someone come stay with you?" Evelyn asked. Sophie shook her head. A neighbor had brought her a sandwich the previous day. That was it. Then Evelyn told me the part that broke something inside me. She asked me if you knew, Marcus. My hand tightened around the phone. "What did she say?" Evelyn's voice became even quieter. She asked, "Does Grandpa know I'm alone?" I was already on my feet. "I'm coming." I called Sophie before I even found my shoes. The phone rang once. "Grandpa." That tiny voice nearly destroyed me. "Hey, sweetheart. Are you okay?" "I think so." Not yes. Not I'm okay. "I think so." She was 8 years old, and already she had learned to make her pain sound smaller, so nobody else would feel uncomfortable. "Listen to me, sweetheart. Is your door locked?" "Yes." "Good. Have you eaten today?" Silence. Then she whispered, "I had cereal." My throat tightened. "Anything else?" "Mrs. Evelyn brought me half a sandwich yesterday." "Yesterday?" "I saved some." "Why?" Her voice trembled. "Because I didn't know when Mommy and Daddy were coming back." I closed my eyes. My own son had left his 8-year-old daughter alone for 2 days while he went on vacation. But then Sophie asked something that hurt even more. "Grandpa, did I do something bad?" My heart cracked. "No, Sophie. You did nothing wrong." "Then why did they take Noah and not me?" Noah was her younger half-brother. "They said the trip was too expensive for everyone. But maybe they didn't take me because I'm difficult." I stood in the middle of my dark hallway, holding my keys. That was the moment something changed inside me. I wasn't going to yell at my son. I wasn't going to beg him for answers. I was going to protect his daughter. "Pack your rabbit and your favorite clothes," I told her. "Grandpa is coming right now." When I pulled into their driveway 20 minutes later, Evelyn was waiting outside. And beside her stood Sophie. Tiny suitcase. Stuffed rabbit. Bare feet inside worn sneakers. When Sophie saw my headlights, she ran. She didn't say a word. She just wrapped both arms around me and held on like she was terrified I'd disappear too. I lifted her into my arms. And as I carried my granddaughter to the car, Evelyn touched my shoulder. "Marcus," she whispered, "there's something else you need to see." I turned toward her. She pointed at my son's dark house. Then she said 4 words that made my blood run cold. "Your son posted it." I carried Sophie to the car, but Evelyn's words followed me. "Your son posted it." I stopped with my hand on the passenger door. "Posted what?" Evelyn looked at me with the kind of sympathy I didn't want. "Go home first. Get Sophie settled. Then look at your son's social media." I didn't need to ask twice. I buckled Sophie into the back seat and tucked her blanket around her. "Grandpa?" "Yeah, sweetheart? Are you mad at me?" I turned around so fast that my chest hurt. "At you?" She nodded. "No, baby. Never." She stared at me. "Then why do you look sad?" Because I was looking at an 8-year-old child who had spent 2 days wondering whether she had done something wrong. Because my son had apparently been living a completely different life while his daughter sat alone in a house. Because somewhere along the way, I had failed to see how badly Sophie needed someone to notice her. I reached back and squeezed her hand. "I'm sad because grown-ups sometimes make very stupid choices. But none of that is your fault." She nodded, though I could tell she didn't completely believe me. "Can we go home?" "Yes." "Your home?" I swallowed. "My home." She leaned back against the seat. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw her shoulders relax. I drove home without turning on the radio. Sophie fell asleep before we reached my neighborhood. When I carried her inside, she barely woke. I placed her in the guest room, found her favorite blanket, and put her rabbit beside her. Then I stood there for a moment, watching her breathe. She looked peaceful now, but I knew that peace had come because someone had finally shown up. I closed the door halfway and went into the kitchen. Then I opened my phone. My son's name was right there, Daniel Mercer. I tapped his profile, and there it was, a photograph posted less than 4 hours earlier. My son Daniel stood on the deck of a luxury cruise ship. His wife, Vanessa, had one arm around him, and between them stood their 6-year-old son, Ethan. All three were smiling. Beautiful ocean behind them. Expensive clothes. Perfect vacation. Perfect family. Then I read the caption. Nothing beats family time. I stared at those words. Family time. I looked toward the hallway, at the bedroom where his daughter was sleeping after surviving on cereal and half a sandwich. Then I looked back at the picture. 3 people. Not 4. Sophie wasn't in it. I zoomed in. Daniel looked happy. Not worried. Not guilty. Happy. And that hurt more than the photograph itself. I had taught that boy how to throw a baseball. I had stayed up with him when he was sick. I had driven him to college and cried after watching him walk through those doors. I had stood beside him at his wedding. And now I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, realizing that the little boy I had raised had become a man capable of walking past his own daughter's bedroom and leaving her behind. I wanted to call him. I wanted to scream. Instead, I opened a notebook. I wrote down the date, then the time, then exactly what Evelyn had told me, then everything Sophie had said, every detail, every word. I wrote down when I picked her up. I saved screenshots of Daniel's post. I saved the voicemail Evelyn had left earlier. I even wrote down what Sophie had eaten, because something inside me was saying this wasn't going to be solved with one angry conversation. This needed to be handled carefully, quietly, legally. I opened my contacts. Evelyn had mentioned an attorney. Her name was Margaret Sloan, 24 years in family law. Apparently, she had a reputation for making people very uncomfortable without ever raising her voice. I called her office. It was after midnight, so I got voicemail. I left a message. My granddaughter is 8 years old. Her parents left her alone for 2 days while they went on vacation. I need to know what I can legally do to protect her. I hung up. Then I looked at the clock. 12:38 a.m. I should have gone to bed. Instead, I opened my laptop. I searched for flights. Then I remembered the photograph. Daniel and Vanessa were still on that cruise, which meant they had no idea what had happened at home. I booked 2 tickets for the next morning. One for me, one for Sophie. Then I called Daniel. It rang. No answer. I expected that. I left a voicemail. My voice was calm, almost strangely calm. Daniel, it's Dad. Don't worry about Sophie. She's with me now. She's safe. I paused. Then I said something that would stay in my son's mind long after that cruise ended. We're going away for a few days too. I ended the call. I didn't tell him where. I didn't tell him about the attorney. And I definitely didn't tell him that I had already started collecting evidence. Then I walked down the hallway. Sophie was still asleep. Her rabbit was tucked beneath her chin. I stood there and whispered the promise I should have made much sooner. Nobody is leaving you behind again. But the next morning, Sophie woke up with a question. And when she asked it, I realized this wasn't just about what her parents had done. It was about what she had started believing about herself. She looked at me and asked, "Grandpa, if Mommy didn't want me on the trip, does that mean she doesn't want me at all?" Sophie was sitting at my kitchen table the next morning, staring at a plate of pancakes like she wasn't sure she was allowed to eat them. I had made too many. That was intentional. I wanted her to understand something simple. In my house, nobody had to save half a sandwich because they were afraid there wouldn't be food later. "Grandpa." I turned from the stove. "Yeah, sweetheart?" She pushed a piece of pancake around with her fork. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." She looked down. "If Mommy didn't want me on the trip, does that mean she doesn't want me at all?" The spatula slipped slightly in my hand. I turned off the stove. Then I walked over and sat beside her. "Sophie, look at me." She slowly lifted her eyes. "Your parents made a terrible decision, but their decision does not decide your worth." Her eyes filled immediately. "But they took Ethan." "I know. They bought him new clothes." "I know. He got to go on the ship." "I know." Her bottom lip trembled. "Maybe I'm just the kid they don't like." That sentence nearly broke me. I reached across the table and held her hand. "Listen carefully. You are not difficult. You are not unwanted. And you are not less important because somebody failed to treat you the way you deserve." She cried then. quietly at first. Then she climbed into my arms. I held her against my chest and let her cry. I didn't tell her everything I was thinking. I didn't tell her I wanted to put my son against a wall and demand to know how he could sleep peacefully while his daughter was alone. I didn't tell her that I had already started making plans. Children shouldn't have to carry the anger of adults. They should only have to carry the certainty that somebody loves them. After breakfast, we packed. Sophie brought her rabbit, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, and what appeared to be every stuffed animal she had ever owned. You said pack light, I reminded her. She looked at me seriously. These are emotionally necessary. I almost laughed. Fine. Emotionally necessary. 3 hours later, we were at the airport. Sophie didn't know where we were going. When I finally told her, her eyes widened. Florida? Florida. Like the ocean? The actual ocean. Her face lit up. And for a few minutes, I forgot about Daniel. I forgot about Vanessa. I forgot about the legal mess waiting for us. I just watched my granddaughter smile. That was enough. We arrived in Miami that afternoon and checked into a small oceanfront resort. I had never been a luxury hotel kind of man. Give me a clean room, a comfortable chair, and coffee that doesn't taste like somebody boiled a shoe. But when Sophie walked into our suite and saw the ocean through the enormous windows, she stopped. Her mouth fell open. Grandpa. Yeah. Is that all ours? I smiled. For the next 4 nights. She pressed both hands against the glass. Then she started laughing. Not the polite little laugh she'd been using lately. A real laugh. A bright, careless laugh. The kind that sounded like an 8-year-old child again. I stood behind her and watched. And suddenly I realized how much I had missed that sound. Maybe that was what hurt the most. I hadn't noticed she had stopped laughing. The next few days became something neither of us expected. We went swimming. We ate ice cream before dinner. We rode horses along the beach. Sophie tried paddleboarding and fell into the water 3 times. On the 3rd attempt, she came back up laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. I took pictures of everything. Not for Daniel. Not for Vanessa. For her. For me. But on the 2nd evening, I posted one picture online. Sophie was standing beside the ocean with her hair blowing across her face, smiling so brightly that I barely recognized the sad little girl I'd found 2 nights earlier. I wrote one sentence beneath it. Some children don't need expensive vacations. They need someone who shows up. Then I put my phone away. I didn't check whether Daniel had seen it. I didn't need to. Because that night, after Sophie fell asleep, I stepped onto the balcony and called Margaret Sloan. She answered immediately. Marcus? Yes. Tell me everything from the beginning. So I did. I told her about Evelyn. The empty house. The cereal. The sandwich. Sophie's question. Daniel's cruise. The photograph. Everything. Margaret listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was silent for several seconds. Then her voice changed. Marcus, I need you to understand something. What? This is no longer just a family disagreement. I tightened my grip on the phone. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to preserve every piece of evidence. Every message. Every photograph. Every timestamp. And when you get home, I want to review Sophie's school records. Why? Because I want to know whether this was the first time she was neglected. Margaret paused. Or simply the first time you discovered it. I stopped breathing. Because suddenly I remembered something. A conversation with Sophie's teacher from 6 months earlier. A conversation I'd dismissed at the time. Margaret continued. And Marcus? Yeah. If those records show what I think they might show, your son isn't going to be dealing with an angry grandfather. My eyes moved toward the bedroom where Sophie was sleeping. He's going to be dealing with a legal problem. I stared at the dark ocean. And for the first time, I wondered how much pain my granddaughter had been hiding before that phone call at 11:52 p.m. Then Margaret asked me to check one thing. Marcus, find out why Sophie's teacher tried to contact her parents 6 months ago. The next morning, I called Sophie's school. I didn't tell the secretary everything. I simply asked if her teacher could send me the records from the last school year. There was a pause. Then she asked, Are you calling about Sophie? Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. Yes. Another pause. I think you should speak directly with Mrs. Palmer. That was when I knew Margaret had been right. This wasn't the first warning. A few hours later, Sophie and I were sitting near the beach when my phone buzzed. It was an email from her teacher. I opened the attachment, and my hands went cold. The first note was dated almost 7 months earlier. Sophie has become unusually withdrawn during group activities. I kept reading. Another note said she had stopped volunteering answers in class. Another mentioned that she had begun asking whether she was in trouble whenever an adult called her name. Then came the counselor's report. It was dated 5 months ago. I read it twice. The counselor had noticed that Sophie was showing signs of anxiety and had recommended that her parents schedule a family meeting. Her parents had been contacted. Both had acknowledged receiving the message. But they never came. I leaned back in my chair. For a moment, the sounds around me disappeared. The ocean was still moving. Children were still laughing. People were still walking along the beach. But all I could see was that sentence. Parents notified. No meeting attended. My son knew. His wife knew. They knew something was happening to their daughter. And they did nothing. I closed my eyes. I remembered Daniel at 8 years old. He used to wake me at 3 in the morning whenever he had a nightmare. He'd crawl into my bed and whisper, "Dad, stay until I fall asleep." And I always did. No matter how tired I was. No matter what time I had to wake up. I stayed. Now his daughter was 8 years old. And when she was afraid, she had apparently learned to stay quiet. That realization hurt worse than anger. It was grief. Grief for the father I thought I'd raised. Grief for the little girl who had learned not to ask for help. And grief because I knew I couldn't undo the months she had already spent feeling unwanted. Sophie was sitting beside me, eating strawberries from a bowl. She looked over. "Grandpa." I quickly locked my phone. "Yeah. Why are you sad?" Children always notice. Even when you think you're hiding it. I smiled. "Just thinking." "About Daddy?" I froze. "Why would you think that?" She shrugged. "Because you get quiet when you think about him." I didn't answer. She picked up another strawberry. Then she said something that nearly made me drop my phone. "Daddy used to say I was too sensitive." I turned toward her. "What?" He said I cried too much. My chest tightened. "Who else said that?" "Mommy." She said it casually, like it was a fact about the weather. Then she looked toward the ocean. I tried not to cry anymore. I couldn't speak. She had been training herself not to feel pain, because the people who were supposed to comfort her had taught her that her feelings were inconvenient. I pulled her against me. "You never have to stop crying around me." She buried her face against my chest. "I don't like being a problem." "You aren't a problem. I don't want Mommy to be mad. She won't get to make you feel guilty for needing love." Sophie lifted her head. "What does that mean?" I realized I had said too much. "Nothing you need to worry about." But I knew what it meant. Things were about to change. That night, I called Margaret again. She had already reviewed the school documents. "This is significant," she said. "How significant?" "Enough that I don't want you confronting your son yet." I looked toward the bedroom. "Why?" "Because if he realizes what you're preparing, he may start trying to explain everything away. We need the records preserved before anyone gets the opportunity to rewrite the story." I nodded. Then she asked me about the trust I'd established for Sophie years earlier. I told her it contained approximately $186,000. Margaret was quiet. "Marcus, are you prepared to change how that money is protected?" "What do you mean?" "I mean your son and his wife may currently expect to inherit everything you leave behind." "They probably do." "Then let's make sure they don't get control of a single dollar meant for Sophie." I stared at the ocean through the balcony doors. "What are you suggesting?" "A protected trust in Sophie's name. Independent management. Education expenses covered. Medical care covered. And the remainder released to her when she reaches adulthood." I thought about Sophie asking whether she was unwanted. Then I remembered Daniel's photograph. The cruise. The perfect family caption. 3 smiling faces. 1 child missing. "Do it," I said. Margaret didn't hesitate. "I'll prepare everything." But I wasn't finished. "There's one more thing." "What?" "When Daniel comes home, I want him to think we're having a family conversation." Margaret understood immediately. "And what will it really be?" I looked through the glass at Sophie sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. "An intervention." Margaret's voice became firm. "Marcus, make sure you understand something. You aren't doing this to punish your son." "I know. You're doing it to protect his daughter." I closed my eyes. "No," I said quietly. "I'm doing it because somebody should have protected her before I had to." The next afternoon, I received a message from Daniel. Only 6 words. "Dad, we need to talk." I stared at it. He still didn't know about Margaret. He still didn't know about the school records. And he certainly didn't know that I had changed Sophie's future permanently. I typed one sentence back. "Come to my house Monday morning." Then I put down my phone. because Daniel thought he was coming home to explain why he left his daughter behind. He had no idea he was walking into a room where every excuse he'd prepared was about to meet the truth. And the most painful part? I wasn't sure whether my son was going to be angry with me, or finally admit what he'd done. Daniel's message stayed on my phone all weekend. "Dad, we need to talk." He had no idea what was waiting for him. Neither did Vanessa. They returned from their cruise on Saturday evening. I knew because Daniel sent another message. "Can we come Monday morning?" I replied with one word. "Yes." Then I put my phone away. I spent Sunday with Sophie. We baked cookies. She helped me plant flowers in the backyard. She talked about school, her favorite books, and a boy in her class who apparently had the world's worst haircut. For a few hours, I let myself be Grandpa again. Not the angry father. Not the man building a case. Just Grandpa. But Monday morning came. At 8:47, Margaret Sloan arrived at my house. She carried a leather folder thick enough to make a person nervous. She placed it on my dining table. "Everything is ready." I looked at the folder. "Does Sophie need to know about any of this?" "Not yet." I nodded. That was exactly what I wanted. She deserved to be a child. At 8:59, a car pulled into my driveway. "Daniel." I looked through the window. My son stepped out first. He looked different from the photographs on the cruise. The vacation tan was still there, but the confidence wasn't. Vanessa got out behind him. She adjusted her jacket, lifted her chin, and walked toward my front door like she had already rehearsed every sentence she planned to say. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The doorbell rang. I opened it. Daniel looked at me. "Dad, come in." His eyes moved past me. "Where's Sophie?" "She's upstairs." Vanessa immediately said, "We came to talk about our daughter." I looked at her. So did I. Something in my voice made her stop. They entered the dining room. Then Daniel saw Margaret. He froze. "Who is that?" I pulled out a chair. "Sit down." His eyes moved from Margaret to the folder. Then back to me. "Dad, what is this?" Margaret answered before I could. "I'm Margaret Sloan, family law attorney." Daniel's face changed. Vanessa stared at me. "You hired an attorney?" "Yes." "For what?" I sat across from them. "You'll find out." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Marcus, this is completely unnecessary. We made a mistake. We were away for a few days and—" Margaret raised one hand. "Mrs. Mercer, we're not discussing feelings yet." Vanessa stared at her. Margaret opened the folder. "We're discussing facts." She placed the first document on the table. The timeline. Dates. Times. The exact period Daniel and Vanessa were away. The hours Sophie was left without responsible adult supervision. The food Evelyn had brought. The phone call. My arrival. Everything. Daniel picked up the pages. His eyes moved slowly across them. Vanessa leaned toward him. "What is this?" He didn't answer. Margaret placed another document beside it. The statement from Mrs. Evelyn Hart. Vanessa's face went pale. Then another. School records. Daniel finally looked up. "Why do you have those?" "Because I requested them," I said. "Dad, you had no right." "Then explain this." I slid the counselor's report toward him. Daniel stopped talking. He read it. His face changed. Not anger. Not confusion. Recognition. That was the moment I knew. He remembered. Margaret watched him carefully. "This report states that both parents were notified about Sophie's emotional decline and recommended for a meeting." Daniel swallowed. Vanessa immediately spoke. "We were busy." I stared at her. "Busy?" "We both had work. You had time for a 10-day cruise." Silence. Daniel looked down. I felt something inside me break. Because he didn't deny it. He didn't even defend himself. He just stared at that document. Finally, Daniel whispered, "I knew she was having problems." I leaned back. "Problems?" His eyes lifted toward mine. "I knew she wasn't herself." "Then why didn't you help her?" He looked away. Vanessa touched his arm. "Daniel, don't." He pulled his arm away. That tiny movement told me more than any confession could have. "Dad," he said, "I thought we'd deal with it when we got back." My voice became quiet. "You thought your 8-year-old daughter could wait?" His eyes filled. "I thought it was one trip." "One trip?" I could hear my own heartbeat. "You walked past her bedroom door." Daniel closed his eyes. "And you kept walking." His face collapsed. Vanessa looked at him sharply. "What is he talking about?" Daniel didn't answer. So I did. He knew she was home alone. Vanessa stood. "That's not true." Margaret calmly placed another paper on the table. Mrs. Mercer, I would strongly recommend that you sit down. She did, because now she was beginning to understand. This wasn't a family argument. This was evidence. Margaret opened the final folder. There are 3 things we need to discuss today. She looked directly at Daniel and Vanessa. First, legally enforceable visitation for Marcus. Vanessa's eyes widened. Second, a formal child welfare report. Daniel's face went completely white. And third, Margaret pushed one final document across the table. A protected trust established solely for Sophie. Daniel stared at it. Then he looked at me. Dad. I said nothing. His voice cracked. Are you taking everything away from us? I looked at the man sitting across from me. My son. The boy I once carried when he was afraid of thunderstorms. The man who had now left his own daughter afraid in an empty house. No, Daniel. I pushed the document closer to him. I'm making sure Sophie has something you can't take away. He looked down. Then Margaret said the words that changed the entire room. And Marcus has one more decision to make. Daniel slowly raised his eyes. Margaret closed the folder. The child welfare report is drafted. A silence followed. It has not been submitted yet. Daniel stared at me. What does that mean? I looked toward the staircase. Sophie was upstairs. Safe. For now. Then I looked back at my son. It means you still have one chance to prove you can be the father she needs. Daniel's lips trembled. And then he finally said the words I'd been waiting to hear. Not an excuse. Not a defense. Just 4 words. Dad, I failed her. But what he didn't know was that admitting it wasn't going to erase what happened. Because Margaret had already prepared the conditions. And once Daniel heard them, he would have to choose between protecting his pride or protecting his daughter. Daniel kept staring at the table. I failed her. Those 4 words were the first honest thing he'd said since walking through my front door. Vanessa looked at him as if she'd never heard her husband admit weakness before. Daniel, stop. He didn't. He kept looking at me. I knew she was struggling, Dad. I knew something was wrong. My jaw tightened. Then why did you leave? His eyes filled. Because Vanessa wanted us to go. Vanessa's head snapped toward him. Don't put this on me. Daniel finally turned toward her. You told me she'd be fine. I said Evelyn lived nearby. You said someone would check on her. I thought someone would. Margaret's voice cut through the room. That's enough. Silence. She looked at both of them. This isn't about assigning blame between the 2 of you. It's about what happened to an 8-year-old child. Daniel lowered his head. Margaret opened her folder again. I've prepared 4 conditions. If you want Marcus to delay the formal report, you need to understand exactly what you're agreeing to. Vanessa crossed her arms. A delay? Yes. Meaning you haven't filed it? Not yet. Vanessa exhaled. For the first time since she'd entered my house, I saw something other than anger in her eyes. Fear. Margaret continued. Condition 1. Sophie begins regular sessions with a licensed child therapist. Daniel nodded slowly. Okay. Condition 2. Marcus receives legally enforceable visitation. Every other weekend, scheduled school breaks, and a designated portion of summer. Vanessa immediately shook her head. No. Margaret didn't blink. Then we proceed with the report. Vanessa stopped. I looked at her. She wanted control. That had always been the problem. Even now, she wasn't asking what Sophie needed. She was asking what she could prevent me from having. Margaret moved to the 3rd condition. Both parents attend family counseling. Daniel nodded. Vanessa stared at him. You're agreeing to this? Daniel looked toward the staircase. Then he said something quietly. I'll agree to anything that helps Sophie. That sentence hurt. Because it was the sentence he should have said before the cruise. Before the empty house. Before the cereal. Before the sandwich she'd saved because she didn't know when her parents would return. Margaret placed the 4th document on the table. And finally the protected trust. Daniel frowned. I don't understand. Marcus has established a trust for Sophie. Vanessa leaned forward. How much? I looked at her. That isn't your concern. Her expression hardened. It is if you're taking assets away from my family. I felt something inside me go completely still. Your family? She didn't answer. I leaned forward. No, Vanessa. That's exactly what you still don't understand. My voice remained calm. The house isn't the issue. The money isn't the issue. The trust isn't the issue. I pointed toward the staircase. She is. Nobody spoke. She is 8 years old. She spent 2 days alone wondering whether she'd done something wrong. And we're sitting here talking about money. Vanessa looked down. For once, she had nothing to say. Margaret explained that the trust would be independently managed. The money could be used for Sophie's education, medical needs, and other approved necessities. When Sophie became an adult, the remaining funds would belong to her. Daniel stared at me. Dad, why didn't you tell me? I almost laughed. Tell you what? That you were doing this. Would you have listened? He looked away. That was answer enough. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. Daniel stood. He walked toward the hallway. I watched him stop near the bottom of the stairs. His eyes moved upward. Sophie's up there? Yes. He nodded. His shoulders began to shake. Can I see her? I wanted to say no. A part of me wanted to protect Sophie from him entirely. But Margaret touched my arm. Let him ask. Daniel climbed the first step. Then stopped. He looked back at me. I don't know what to say to her. I stared at my son. You don't need a speech. His eyes were wet. Then what do I say? The truth. He nodded, and slowly climbed the stairs. I remained downstairs. I didn't follow. Some moments belong to a father and daughter. Some moments belong to the child who was hurt and the parent who caused it. I heard Daniel knock softly. Then his voice. Sophie. Nothing. A few seconds passed. Then Sophie answered. Daddy. My chest tightened. Daniel's voice broke. Can I come in? Silence. Then a tiny answer. Okay. I looked at Margaret. Neither of us spoke. Minutes passed. Then I heard Sophie crying. My first instinct was to run upstairs. I stood. Margaret caught my eye. Wait. I hated that word. But I waited. Then Daniel started crying too. And what happened next was something I never expected to hear from my son. I should have taken you with me. Sophie said something I couldn't hear. Daniel answered. No. It wasn't because you weren't good enough. Another pause. Then his voice cracked. It was because I made a selfish choice. I sat back down. My eyes burned. For the first time, Daniel wasn't defending himself. He was telling his daughter the truth. But then Sophie asked a question that made the entire house go silent. Daddy, if Grandpa hadn't come, would you have come back for me? I closed my eyes. There are questions a father should never have to hear his granddaughter ask. Daniel didn't answer immediately. And when he finally did, his voice was barely audible. I don't know. That answer broke me more than any lie could have. Because at least it was honest. After several minutes, Daniel came downstairs alone. His face was wet. He sat across from me. Dad. I looked at him. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good. He nodded. I don't deserve it yet. That word stayed with me. Yet. Maybe there was still something left to save. Not the family we had been. That family was gone. But perhaps a new one could be built from the pieces. Daniel signed the first agreement that morning. Vanessa resisted until Margaret explained exactly what would happen if she refused. Then she signed too. At 10:18 a.m., they left my house. But Daniel stopped at the front door. He didn't turn around. Dad. Yeah. Is she okay? I looked toward the stairs. She will be. He nodded. Then I added the words I'd been waiting to say. But you don't get to say you love her anymore. He finally turned. I held his gaze. You have to prove it. Daniel swallowed. Then he walked away. I thought that was the end of the hardest part. I was wrong. Because that evening Margaret called me. Her voice sounded different. More serious than usual. Marcus, I need you to sit down. I did. What happened? We received another document from the school. My stomach dropped. Another one? Yes. What does it say? Margaret took a breath. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. Sophie wasn't the only person who noticed that something was wrong. And when Margaret told me who had tried to report it months earlier, I realized the story was much bigger than my son and his wife. Someone had been watching. Someone had known. And someone had stayed silent. Margaret's words stayed in my head long after the call ended. Someone else knew. I called her back. Margaret, who? She didn't answer immediately. Marcus, I want you to read the document yourself before we discuss it. Send it. A few seconds later, an email appeared. I opened the attachment. It was from Sophie's school counselor. But this wasn't the report I'd already seen. This was an internal note. A second warning. And the date made my stomach turn. It had been written only 3 weeks before Daniel and Vanessa left for their cruise. The counselor had written that Sophie had become increasingly withdrawn. She had stopped participating in class. She had begun asking teachers whether children could be sent away if their parents didn't want them. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I looked at the next paragraph. Sophie had apparently told her teacher something else. She said she sometimes stayed in her room because she didn't want to make mommy angry. My hand started shaking. I thought about the little girl at the restaurant in Miami asking whether there was something wrong with her. She hadn't suddenly become insecure. Someone had been teaching her to feel that way. For months. Then I reached the final section. A school staff member had attempted to contact Daniel and Vanessa. No response. Another attempt. No response. Then someone had called the emergency contact listed for Sophie. I stopped reading. My name was on the screen. Marcus Hale, grandfather. I stared at it. Why didn't they call me? Margaret was still on the phone. They did. My stomach dropped. What? Look at the date. I did. 7 months earlier. There was a note beside my name. Voicemail left. No response. I couldn't breathe. I searched my old phone records. Then my email. Nothing. No voicemail. No email. No missed call. Nothing. Margaret, I never received anything. I know. How? Because I asked the school for the communication log. I sat down. Someone had attempted to reach me. But somehow, I had never been informed. Who was supposed to contact me? Margaret's voice became careful. The school's record says Daniel told them he would handle communication with family. My blood ran cold. Daniel. My own son. I called him immediately. He answered on the 4th ring. Dad, did you tell Sophie's school you would handle communication with me? Silence. That silence answered the question. Daniel. I didn't think it mattered. My chest tightened. 7 months ago, they were worried about your daughter. I know. They tried to contact me. I know. Why didn't you tell me? His breathing changed. Because I didn't want you involved. I stood. You didn't want me involved? Dad, you always think you can fix everything. No. I think a child deserves someone who notices when she's hurting. He went quiet. Then he said something that stopped my anger for a moment. I was embarrassed. What? I didn't want you to know I couldn't handle her. I closed my eyes. For the first time, I heard something underneath all his excuses. Fear. Daniel wasn't just selfish. He was overwhelmed. And instead of admitting it, he'd hidden the problem. That didn't excuse what he'd done. But it explained how the silence had grown. Daniel, I said quietly, being overwhelmed doesn't make you a bad father. He didn't answer. Pretending everything is fine while your daughter is falling apart does. His voice cracked. I know. I sat back down. Then tell me everything. Another silence. This one lasted longer. Finally, Daniel said, Vanessa and I were fighting constantly. About what? About Sophie. I felt my stomach tighten. What about her? Vanessa said Sophie was becoming too attached to you. I stared at the wall. What? She said you were undermining us. That Sophie listened to you more than she listened to her. I almost laughed. But there was nothing funny about it. So you pushed me away? Daniel whispered, yes. And when the school contacted you? I told myself we'd handle it. And when you planned the cruise? I thought it would reset everything. Reset what? My family. That word hit me. His family. As if Sophie had been a problem disrupting the picture he wanted. I looked toward the stairs. She was never the problem, Daniel. I know. No. I don't think you do. He started crying. I know now. I let the silence remain. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me since the night I found Sophie alone. Why did you take Ethan and leave her? Daniel didn't answer. Daniel. Finally, he whispered. Because Vanessa said Sophie would ruin the trip. My eyes closed. There it was. The truth. Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. A choice. They had looked at an 8-year-old girl and decided her presence would be inconvenient. I felt the old anger rise again. But this time I didn't explode. I simply said, thank you for finally telling me the truth. Dad, we're not finished. What do you mean? I looked at Margaret's folder sitting on my table. Because I need you to understand something. Daniel went silent. I'm not going to destroy your life. His breathing slowed. But I'm also not going to protect you from the consequences of what you did. He whispered, I understand. I hope you do. I ended the call. Then I walked upstairs. Sophie was sitting on her bed, drawing something. She looked up. Grandpa. Yes, sweetheart? Can I show you? She held up the paper. It was a picture of 4 people standing beside a house. Me. Her. Daniel. And Ethan. I looked at the drawing. Where's Mommy? Sophie paused. Then she added another figure. Small. At the edge. She didn't say anything. I sat beside her. That's beautiful. She smiled. Then she asked, Does Daddy still love me? My throat tightened. Yes. Even when I cry? Yes. Even when I make mistakes? Yes. She thought about that. Then why did he leave me? I couldn't give her the answer she deserved. Not yet. So I told her the only thing I knew was completely true. Sometimes adults make choices because they're weak, scared, or selfish. She looked at me. But none of those things mean you're hard to love. She leaned against my shoulder. And I held her. That night, Margaret sent me the final version of the trust documents. I signed them. Then she called. Marcus, there's one more thing. I almost smiled. There's always one more thing with you. She didn't laugh. The school counselor wants to meet with you. Why? She says she remembers one specific conversation with Sophie. My smile disappeared. What conversation? She says Sophie told her something about the night her parents left. I sat upright. What did Sophie say? Margaret paused. Then she answered. She said her mother told her not to call Grandpa. I couldn't move. Because that meant the person who had tried to reach me wasn't the only one who knew. Someone had actively tried to keep me away. And suddenly I understood. The cruise hadn't been the beginning. It had been the moment everything finally became impossible to hide. The counselor met me the next morning. Her name was Dr. Elaine Porter. She placed a thin folder on the table between us and looked at me for several seconds before speaking. Marcus, I need to be careful about what I tell you. I understand. But Sophie deserves to have someone finally listen. That sentence alone told me how serious this was. Elaine explained that Sophie had spoken to her months earlier. Not once. Several times. She had talked about being afraid to upset her mother. She had talked about staying in her bedroom when her parents argued. And then, one afternoon, Sophie had asked a question that Elaine couldn't forget. Do grandparents stop loving you if your parents tell them to stay away? I stared at the counselor. That's what she asked. Elaine nodded. I looked down at my hands. All those months, I'd thought my distance from Sophie was simply because Daniel was busy. I had respected his boundaries. I had told myself that parents knew what was best for their children. And while I was being respectful, my granddaughter had apparently been wondering whether I'd stopped loving her. That realization hurt more than anything Daniel had done. I asked Elaine about the phone call. She confirmed that the school had tried to contact me. But according to their records, Daniel had told them he would handle family communication. Then came the detail that made everything clear. Elaine had written a note after one conversation with Sophie. Child reports mother discourages contact with maternal and paternal relatives during periods of conflict. I read it twice. Then I closed the folder. Did Sophie ever say her mother specifically told her not to call me? Elaine nodded. Yes. My chest tightened. What exactly did she say? Elaine hesitated. She said her mother told her that Grandpa was too emotional and would make everything worse. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because I finally understood. Daniel and Vanessa hadn't simply forgotten Sophie. They had slowly built a wall around her. And then, when she became anxious and withdrawn, they treated her pain like an inconvenience. That ended that day. Margaret filed the necessary paperwork. The trust was finalized. The visitation agreement became enforceable. Sophie began therapy. And the child welfare report remained sealed under the conditions we'd agreed upon, giving Daniel and Vanessa a chance to prove they could change. But I didn't want revenge anymore. Not the kind I had imagined during that first night. I wanted accountability. There was a difference. Revenge would have destroyed my son. Accountability would force him to become the father his daughter needed. 6 months passed. And slowly things changed. Sophie still came to my house every other weekend. She still slept with her rabbit. She still insisted pancakes tasted better when I made them badly. And she started laughing again. That mattered more to me than anything money could buy. She also continued therapy. At first, she hated talking about her feelings. Then one Sunday, she came downstairs after a session and announced, "Grandpa, I'm getting better at telling people when I'm mad." I smiled. That's good. She thought about it. I'm also getting better at telling people when I'm sad. Even better. She pointed at me. But I'm still not telling you when I'm hungry because you make me eat vegetables. I laughed. There she is. The old Sophie was coming back. And Daniel, he changed too. Not overnight. Not magically. He started attending every counseling session. He showed up at school events. He sat through soccer games in the rain. He attended parent meetings. He stopped making excuses. One afternoon, he called me. Dad. Yeah. I need to tell you something. What? I went through Sophie's old school reports. I didn't answer. I read everything. His voice became rough. I didn't know how bad it was. I said quietly, you knew enough. I know. There was a long silence. Then Daniel said, I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not the person you need forgiveness from. I know. Ask Sophie someday. His voice cracked. I will. Vanessa changed more slowly. She was still defensive sometimes. Still uncomfortable admitting how badly she'd handled things. But she started showing up too. She apologized to Sophie. Not once. Repeatedly. And one evening, I watched Vanessa kneel beside her daughter and say something I never thought I'd hear. You were never too much. Sophie didn't immediately hug her. And that was okay. Healing doesn't happen because someone says the right sentence once. Trust has to be earned. Piece by piece. Week by week. 6 months after that terrible night, Sophie called me on Sunday evening. Grandpa. What's up, Ladybug? I got an A on my science test. An A? Yep. That's my girl. She giggled. Then she said, Daddy came to school today. I know. He sat in the front row. Did he? Yeah. He clapped really loud. I smiled. Sounds like your father. She was quiet. Then she asked, Grandpa? Yeah. Do you think Daddy is really trying now? I looked out my window. Across the street, the evening light was fading. Yes, sweetheart. Good. Another pause. Then she whispered, because I think I want him to be my daddy again. My eyes burned. I turned away from the window. Then maybe you should give him the chance to earn it. Okay. She was quiet for another second. Grandpa. What? Thank you for coming that night. I couldn't speak. She continued. I was really scared. I finally managed to answer. I know. And I thought nobody was coming. My throat tightened. But you came. I closed my eyes. Yes, baby. I knew you would. That broke me. Because she hadn't known. Not really. She had hoped. There was a difference. And I realized something that night. Children don't always remember the expensive gifts. They remember who came when they were afraid. Who answered the phone. Who opened the door. Who stayed. Daniel had spent years thinking being a father meant providing things. A house. Food. Vacations. Money. But Sophie taught all of us something different. Being a parent isn't measured by what you can afford. It's measured by whether your child believes you'll come when they call. I didn't destroy my son's life. I didn't take revenge on his wife. I simply made sure Sophie had something neither of them could take away again. A safe place. A voice. A future. And the absolute certainty that she was wanted. Because sometimes the deepest justice isn't watching someone lose everything. Sometimes it's watching the person who failed your child finally become worthy of her trust. And 6 months later, when Daniel stood in the school auditorium and applauded his daughter louder than everyone else, I looked at Sophie. She was smiling at him. Not because she had forgotten, because she was finally beginning to believe he would stay. And that was the revenge I never expected. Not destruction. Not money. Not punishment. Just a little girl who had once asked, did I do something wrong? Finally understanding the answer. She never did. Not once.